All right, now we're going to talk about increasing and decreasing intervals. So what do you remember about a function increasing versus a function decreasing? Intervals, that's the same interval notation we were talking about with domain and range. So hopefully that makes sense. So first, we need to make sure we understand some notation. So I want you to take a minute. What does it mean if I say that x1 is less than x2? So on a graph, what does that mean? Numerically, what does that mean? And then the same for what does it mean if I say that f of x1 is less than f of x2? On a graph, what does that mean? Numerically, what does that mean? So pause the video, take a minute, and write down what those mean, because it's important that you understand the notation. Okay, so this is why it's important, because our definition for increasing, decreasing, and constant over intervals is a function f is increasing, so this is the definition for increasing on an interval if for any x1 and x2 in the interval, x1 is less than x2 implies that f of x1 is less than f of x2. So if this is true, leading to this being true, then the function is increasing. For decreasing, same starting thing, so a function f is decreasing, so substitute decreasing on an interval if for any x1 and x2 in the interval, x1 is less than x2 implies that f of x1 is greater than f of x2. So this is going to be decreasing, and then constant is, again, a function is f is constant on an interval if for any x1 and x2 in the interval, x1 is less than x2 implies that f of x1 equals f of x2. So that would be constant. A couple other definitions. A relative maximum is a point where a function changes from increasing to decreasing. A relative minimum is a point where a function changes from decreasing to increasing. So both of these are considered turning points on a graph. If you think about a parabola, for instance, this would be the vertex of the parabola. Okay, so increasing and decreasing intervals, again, we're talking about interval notation. So as we go from left to right, we want to talk about x values on the curve. So all of our answers for increasing and decreasing intervals are going to be x values. So we want to think about, are we going up, down, or neither? So here I want you to figure out what is the domain of this function, what are the increasing intervals, and what are the decreasing intervals. So I want you to pause the video, take a minute to do that, think about those answers, and then check your answers. So the domain here is negative infinity to infinity, or all real numbers. We are assuming that the graph doesn't just stop at these, it continues on. The increasing intervals are negative infinity to negative 3 and 0 to infinity, and the decreasing interval is from negative 3 to 0. Notice that I used parentheses on all of the increasing and decreasing intervals. That's because at this point, this would be considered a relative maximum. At that point, the function isn't doing anything. So this is kind of one of those things that in math it's kind of ambiguous. Should we use brackets here? Should we use interval or parentheses? Just to be all on the same page, we're all going to use parentheses. It's something that can be argued either way. It's not worth the argument, so we're just going to use parentheses. Same with right here. This is where it changed from decreasing to increasing. So this would be considered a relative minimum at that point. But again, we're just going to use parentheses. All right? Not worth arguing. But the domain is still negative infinity to infinity, or all real numbers. Also, I want to emphasize again that the increasing and decreasing intervals are all x values or inputs, or another way to think about it, relating to the domain. So whenever you are writing the increasing and decreasing and constant intervals for a function, the lowest value on the increasing and decreasing intervals should be the lowest value of the domain, the highest value should be the highest value of the domain, and they should all connect. So for instance, I go from negative infinity to negative 3, and then I start at negative 3 again and I go to 0, and then I start at 0 again and I go to infinity. So they all connect. Alright, so here is our conclusion about even, odd, and increasing and decreasing in constant intervals, as well as relative minimums and maximums. On to the next video.